All right. So we have been in the Sermon on the Mount for 18 whole lessons. It has been a long road through the Sermon on the Mount. We could probably do many more lessons than that, but we have done only 18. Only 18. And this is the 18th, I should say. We've done 17 so far. And so we are going to continue on into number 18 and finish up the Sermon on the Mount, talking about a firm foundation. And we're gonna take a look at what Jesus has to say. He gives us an architectural illustration in this one, and he's going to talk about a firm foundation. So, so let's jump in and read the last bit of Matthew chapter 7. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain comes down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain comes down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as teachers of the law. So, Jesus concludes his sermon by talking about these two houses, and he says that one house is built on a rock with a deep foundation. Now, if you know what a foundation is the platform, the slab of rock that a house or building is built on. It's what gives it support and strength, and so you need your foundation to be strong, because all the weight of your house is going to be distributed across it. So it says, one house is built on a rock with a very deep foundation, a strong foundation, something that's sturdy. The other house was built on the sand without a deep foundation at all. And the storm comes through and it destroys the house with a strong foundation destroys the house with a weak foundation and leaves the house with a strong foundation. So over here on the left, you see this picture, and this is a picture of a house that made the news. And this house is in Florida after Hurricane Marshall came through a few years ago. Everything around this house was destroyed, and this house stood sturdy, stayed strong, and so it made the news because, as you can see, there's desolation all around it. But this house stayed strong. It did not fall. And so I actually want to show you a news story on this house, because I think they say some really interesting things that are directly applicable to what we're reading Jesus talk about here. I think this is a pretty live picture of this little illustration that Jesus uses. So sit back and watch this video. It's about 3 minutes long.
Tonight, Florida's Mexico Beach, surviving the storm.
Lives lost, homes destroyed, and lessons learned. Nearly 10 months now since Hurricane Michael slammed ashore as a Category 5. These panhandle communities just devastated, still recovering, of course. The size of that storm, when it struck, stretched hundreds of miles, covering parts of Florida and most of Alabama and Georgia. But despite the total devastation along the beach, one home withstood the 160-mile-an-hour winds. First Coast News anchor Heather Crawford and meteorologist Lauren Rautenkrantz are joining us live from Mexico Beach. And you've learned some things that we should all know and think about before that next storm.
Oh, Jeannie, we both have learned a lot since we've been here on the ground in Mexico Beach. You know, this is an old Florida town, and a lot of the homes here really just did not stand a chance, like the ones you see right behind us. We've seen a lot of homes that were just really wiped clear off their foundation. All that remains now is a concrete slab. But the owner of the home you're about to see, well, he did a lot of things right.
Although the homeowner, Russell King, that we spoke with, he's very humble. He admits that they did some things wrong as well, and they're learning from those lessons just to prepare themselves to withstand any size storm.
All these townhouses here, they're all just wiped out, just gone. There were like 40 on each side. Poof, they're gone. Just that, you know, in 10 minutes. And carried away.
Russell King's beachfront vacation home is surrounded by concrete slabs where homes once stood. He and his nephew had just finished building this house 6 months before Hurricane Michael brought 160-mile-per-hour winds and a 17.5-foot storm surge to Mexico Beach.
In the beginning with the engineers, I told them I wanted a hurricane house. Not that the hurricane would take down, but would survive.
What is it about your house that made it survive?
It's 100 things. Because these windows survived, this house survived.
From hurricane windows to hurricane clips.
Everywhere two boards come together, put a clip. Everywhere.
To concrete walls, even drains in the floors.
Water came in and drained out.
This house was built above code, with every decision focused on what would give it the best chance of surviving a big storm.
I know a full hip roof works. I know that now. I was told it before, I know it now, because I've seen it proven 100 times. You only should have a hip roof.
While his home did suffer some damage, he is now working to reinforce it based on lessons he learned from Hurricane Michael.
We used to have a fan there. There will never be another fan there. We'll never have another fan in an outdoor area ever again. They're nice. The wind gets in there, it tears up the fan. It's got a hole, it pulls the ceiling down.
His advice?
And you better get a team together. An engineer, a builder, an architect, designer. You better put it together, and then you're going to have to give up some things you probably won't to increase your chances to survive.
And that's why he built the house, was to make sure that it survived. His nephew, who built the house with him, told me that a chain is no stronger than its weakest link. So if any single thing fails, like one window, the whole house could be a loss.
And you know, they were just so close to seeing that, but thankfully the hurricane-proof windows, those doors being sealed correctly, are all very critical. And think of it as like if a window were to break or if a door were to break, that wind gets in and it's like a dog that's scratching and scratching to get out of the house, and it eventually, unfortunately, does.
And so coming up tonight at 7, we'll have more live coverage from Mexico Beach, more lessons learned from the folks here who survived the Category 5 hurricane last October. We're live tonight in Mexico Beach. I'm Heather Crawford alongside meteorologist Lauren Roundkrantz.
All right, so we see that video, and what we kind of learn about this is that if one thing about the house is built wrong, if there's a single thing wrong with the house, it could be a window, could be a shallow foundation, could be a fan in the ceiling on a porch, the entire house could be destroyed. Because you let a little bit of wind in, and that wind gets trapped, and it rushes around and looks for an escape, and it starts tearing things up. And all it takes is one weak point, one thing to give way with the wrong gust of wind, and you could lose your entire house. And this man went a little what many would consider overboard, but in the end, this man had a house while everybody else around him had theirs swept away. And he did so much to make sure that his house was secure, and he had it well built. And so in the end, you had all these other houses down the street, and yes, those houses may have been beautiful houses. They can be a house can be very pretty on the outside, but if it's built with bad materials, if it's built poorly, if it has a bad foundation, its very roots are not going to hold up. Then it will be destroyed the moment a bad storm comes. And so this is the lesson that we can learn. And Paul talks about this as well. Paul talks about the importance of having a good foundation in your walk with the Lord. 1 Corinthians 3:10-15 says, "By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on his foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames." All right, so Jesus is using this illustration of a foundation, of a firm foundation, and he concludes with this illustration, concludes the whole sermon with this illustration, because his sermon so far has been this blueprint for what his followers' lives should look like. A blueprint is, what they build a house off. It's the instructions for a house, building a house. And Jesus is saying, hey, this Sermon on the Mount, this is about what I expect from my followers. These are the standards I expect for them to live by. And these are the things that you need to have a firm foundation. If you don't build a house on a firm foundation, if the very things you start with that support the weight of everything else are faulty, then your house will crumble. Your house will not survive a storm. And so, just to review really what we've covered, that's what we're going to spend the rest of this lesson doing, is just kind of reviewing, going through. Jesus gives us these, in the Sermon on the Mount, 5 principles that we can use for a strong foundation. First principle that he gives us is righteousness. Matthew, he sets a standard of righteousness through basically the whole first 2 chapters. And he takes a standard that's a typical standard of righteousness, and he says that's not high enough, and he raises it. And so he raises it to a significantly higher standard. And in the end, but this is what Jesus expects of his followers. So let's read. He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Matthew 5:6, right? And so he elevates these standards, and he takes the examples of laws, as you remember, and he raises them up to be even stricter. And it basically says righteousness isn't about the letter of the law. It's not about following exactly word for word what the law says and nothing more, nothing less. It's about your heart behind your action. You can follow a law. You can do a good thing with bad motivations. Or you can do a bad thing with good motivations sometimes, but what matters most is what is your heart behind the action. And so he gives several examples of this. He says, a heart filled with anger is like murder. It's not just do not murder, but it's like don't let anger rule your life. Matthew 5:21-22. You've heard it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Jesus also gives another example. Eyes filled with lust is like adultery. You don't have to simply sleep with someone else's spouse to commit adultery. You can simply lust after that person with your eyes and let your thoughts run away. Matthew 5:28. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus also says our word is to be binding, and an oath isn't to be broken, whether in marriage or in personal agreements. And so he talks about divorce, and he talks about swearing oaths on things just to sound righteous, but oaths that you didn't really mean, or that you've given yourself a way out of. In Matthew 5:37, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So he says, hey, your word should be your word. It should be as binding as swearing an oath. Don't let swearing an oath be a tool that you use to look super righteous or make your word even better than it is. If your word needs an oath to be better, then that means that your word's not very good. All right, so he also tells us, continue on, he tells us that righteousness isn't about being noticed. This is where he kind of goes on into chapter 6, where he says, be careful not to practice righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So he doesn't want you to just go around doing good acts for the sake of being noticed by everybody and increasing your power and respect on earth. He wants you to do good acts because a good act is worth doing, because it is a good thing to do, because God instructs you to do it. That's why he wants you to do righteous things, but not for the sake of being noticed. And so he talks for a long time in chapter 6 about being noticed, doing righteous things, and be careful about how you go about it. So that's principle number 1, is righteousness. The standard of righteousness he expects us to live by. Principle number 2 is prayer. God desires an intimate relationship with you where you spend your time with him and where you bring your burdens to him. God desires this relationship. He does not want something superficial. He wants to have a deep, intimate relationship with each and every one of his followers. This is why he teaches us how to pray in chapter 6. Let me read you the whole section, Matthew 6, 9 through 13. This, then, is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So he says, hey, this is how you pray. I want to talk to you. So let me give you an example of how to pray. And in the context, don't pray just for the sake of being noticed. Pray because you want people to hear, or because you want to have a relationship with God where you talk to him, not because you want people to hear you. Jesus wants you to bring your requests to God. Don't just pray for the sake of talking to God. Actually bring your burdens, bring your requests. Matthew 7:7 says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. And so Jesus expects that you will come and pray. You will come and talk to God daily, all the time. Other places in the Bible tell us to pray continually. Pray. Praying is so important for you and your relationship with the Lord. And so it does not need to be just simply those things, a box that you check, but instead don't be afraid to ask God for things. Don't be afraid to come and talk to God, to come present your requests boldly before the throne of God. All right, so we have righteousness, we have prayer. The next thing is trust. And God expects that we are to focus on righteousness, that first principle, without worry of our needs being fulfilled. Jesus, over and over again through this section, says that God is going to provide for our needs. So if you have to, in order to be righteous, you have to give generously to someone from your own wealth, your own finances. Trust that God will provide for you, and trust that God sees that, and that God is not going to let you starve because you did something righteous. And so God is going to provide. Matthew 6:33-34 says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So, God wants you to trust that he is able to clothe you, to feed you. Remember that God, he tells us later in the Sermon on the Mount, God is a good father who gives good gifts. He wants his children to have good things. Now, good things, remember, don't always look like what we want them to or think they should, but he does desire us to have good things. Matthew 7:11, if you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Good gifts align with God's will, and so we can trust that God will provide for our needs. If it is good, then it is going to align with God's will, and so we can trust God as a loving Father to take care of us and do what is best for us. Or really, not even what is best for us, what is best for God's will, for the will of the Lord. And sometimes that means that things are hard for us, but it does not mean that God is not ever going to take care of his people. Psalm 37:25 gives us this promise that I've read before I was young, and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging for bread. All right, so that was our next principle. Then we have humility. Not only does Jesus want his followers to do righteous acts for not do them for public recognition, but he wants them to be careful about passing judgment. So not only don't go showboat your righteous deeds, but also don't judge. Like, be very careful about how you judge. So Matthew 7, 1 through 2 and verse 5 says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way You judge others, you will be judged, and with measure you use, it will be measured to you. You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So to sum it up, be aware of your own sin, and that you are and to remember that you are no less sinful than anyone else. Right? If you see someone that has done something wrong, odds are good that you yourself have also done something wrong, whether the same thing or something different. And so because of that, your judgment might actually not be the clearest. And by recognizing our own need for forgiveness and grace, we build this firm foundation of humility that will allow us to grow in our relationship with God and with others. It'll help us to thrive, to be humble. So the last principle is love. God expects his followers to be recognized by their love. We've talked about this so many times in the past few weeks, that Jesus wants his followers to be known by their love. That love doesn't need to just be shown to those that you like. It should be shown to your enemies as well, the people that hate you and that you want to hate, that you're tempted to hate. Show them love. Matthew 5:44, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And this is one of those things that is so easy to say and so difficult to complete. Because when we have enemies, they are we want the worst for them. We don't want them to succeed. But God wants us to trust that he will handle those things. He will handle our enemies. That's his job. What he wants us to do is go out of our way to show love to others. And to do it in such a way that we show love to others. The love that we show to others is the love that we would want shown to ourselves. Because guess what? You're going to treat yourself the best. And so instead, go out of take those things that you would want done for you and go do them for other people. Show them that love. Actively go out and show love. Don't just passively be nice. Actively show love to everybody. Matthew 7:12. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. So remember, he says that command, do unto others as you'd have them do to you, sums up basically the entire Old Testament. And so you have these foundations, these 5 principles, and these are the things that Jesus thinks are so important that you should make sure are good, each and every one of them. Are you humble? Are you righteous? Are you loving? Do you pray? Do you show people love? These are the things that God wants you to have in your life. Do you trust him? And so the question we are left asking at the end of this Sermon on the Mount, at the end of these 18 lessons, is a personal reflective question, and that is your foundation firm? Because here's the thing, the question is not, will storms come? Because they will come. Whether you like it or not, you will be faced with storms in your life, not just one, but many storms. Storms are a part of life in a fallen world. Things are hard sometimes, and some storms are bigger than other storms. But in the end, you have to ask the question, are you prepared for the storm? And we think back to what in that interview, the nephew of the man whose house survived said. He said, a house is like a chain. It is only as strong as its weakest link. If that one window fails, you could lose the entire house. If you have one thing that is weak, the entire thing could come down. And yes, that is high pressure. To have it considered where if one area of your faith isn't sturdy, that the entire thing could fail. Oh my goodness, how much pressure is that? And yes, Jesus does have high expectations. But here's the thing, he has high expectations because he knows what it takes to survive the storm. He's not just setting unreasonably high expectations for you because he's being difficult. He's setting high expectations because he knows that there will be storms far greater than Hurricane Michael that come through and that will tear apart your house if you do not have a firm foundation. Jesus looks at our lives and at our futures as humans, each individual human, knowing that there are going to be challenges that are far beyond what you can even imagine at this point sometimes. There are going to be little challenges and there are going to be big challenges. There are going to be challenges that rock your whole world. And if your foundation is not sturdy, what is going to happen to your house when that storm hits? Yes, it might weather one storm. Some of those houses were old. They were on the beach. This was not the first hurricane that hit them. Those houses weathered many storms, but guess what? There was one storm that was too much. But there was one house that survived that storm, and that was the house where somebody went overboard, making sure every bit of it was fortified. So take time. Reflect on these 5 principles. Look at your life as a believer. Are you good on these things? Do you need to grow in these areas? Answer for all of us is probably yes. We all need to grow in these areas. But are you taking time to establish a firm foundation in your life? A foundation based in Jesus, where Jesus is the foundation on which we build our lives on. Jesus is the rock that cannot be shaken. So I leave you with that question. And next week we'll continue on talking about Jesus. But for now, if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out. You know how to reach me. And I will see you next week.